Namaskara and good evening. Welcome to this BIC stream session that is being held in collaboration with Citizen Matters and Vidhi Legal. The subject is green or gone. The focus is on the degradation on Bangalore's environment, its natural heritage, its biodiversity and the like. It's a very, very pressing problem. And before I come to introducing the panelists, this is something that is really a very serious problem for Bangalore if it's not tackled early. Some of us who have been working on this subject for a few decades have always felt that Bangalore's doomsday is going to come with an urban flooding. We did see signs of it 6-7 years ago. Of course, COVID came as the doomsday scenario for the whole world. But Bangalore's challenges with its overbuilt environment, the urban degradation that has happened, the flooding that happens after rains, they have not gone away. And it is topical that Citizen Matters and Vidhi Legal have decided to address this particular subject for this session. There are a whole lot of alphabet soups that we have in our city. I mean, a BBMP, a BWSSB, a BESCOM. I mean, government is full of alphabet soups. And these multiple agencies tend to work often at cross purposes and rarely in sync. They tend to address a local problem without a sense of the larger issue of looking in terms of watershed development and how natural contours flow and the like. Now, to protect us against the damages that happen with all these activities, we have another set of alphabet soup, which goes by things like EIA, EMP, ACIAA. You'll hear more about these as we go forward. They are meant to protect us, meant to regulate the environmental growth in this place. But in reality, the question to ask ourselves, and which I'm sure the panel will address, is, are they doing what they are meant to do? For starters, does the environmental impact assessment finally make a difference? Or is it something like a checkbox that just gets done and fails? I don't want to take away any of the points that the panelists might make. So I would now first welcome all the panelists, Dr. Jairam, Ulka, Banu, Mohan, Debadityo, and Meera. Thank you for being on this panel this evening. And we are hoping that as you go through this evening, we will have a good sense of what is the nature of the problem. And more importantly, I hope you will find us some solutions for Bengaluru. With this, over to you, Debadityo, to provide a context for the evening's session, after which Meera will moderate the rest of the panel discussion. Thank you and welcome once again. Debadityo.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And thank you for making me part of this very important session on Bangalore's environment. So, problems with Bangalore and any other metro cities like, urbanization and rapid urbanization beyond their kind capacity. And if you see Bengaluru, it is like more like an ever expanding city. So in 17th century, it was hardly 2 square kilometers during time of Tipu Sultan. It was 70 square kilometers when like British left the country. And when this BDA, Bangalore Development Authority, was established in 1960s, it was hardly 112 square kilometers. Now, and if you see, like, it is expanding till, today it is 741 square kilometer, which is the area under Brihat Bengaluru Mahanagar Palika, the municipal council of the Bengaluru. But this Bengaluru urban district, it is the smallest in the state, hardly 2,000 square kilometer, but biggest in terms of population. And if you talk about the population density of Bengaluru urban, it is district, I'm talking about district. So it is 4,381. And the following densities are in the range of 400 to 460. Those are basically Bengaluru, rural, or Dakshin Kannada, Dharwar, Mysore. So see the difference, like, it is 10, 12 times more than what is the immediately like next population densities in the state. So it is heavily populated, very dense populated and expanding. Now, when we talk about Bengaluru, it is not only about the urban district or the city as such, or the municipal areas, because every city expands, so they have new terminologies, new kind of authorities, and new schemes are launched. So all these things happen, and we have seen every city. In Delhi, we had initially NCR, which is the national capital region. It was initially Noida, Faridabad, Gurgaon. Now it is now expanding. Inside itself is expanding. So similarly, Bangalore has this Bangalore Metropolitan Region Development Authority. So when the area of under this region development authority is 8,200 square kilometers. I have the map, but I think the map showing the map is not necessary. So this expansion is going to be like always has been part of the time, and it is happening in future also. But what matters is that what is happening today, whether we have enough learnings from those like development, and whether they are sustainable enough, whether like we could have saved those things, protect those that. And I think in context of Bengaluru, we have like three major things. Like one is of course the pollution and traffic, noise pollution, everything it is of every city. But like if you talk about the landscape, then forest, grasslands, and wetlands are the most affected. So I have just a couple of pictures to show. This is from article by Hari Nagendran, and it clearly sums up the story of what happened to the wetlands of Bangalore. Now, you see, there was a time when Bangalore in 1990, it has 576 lakes. Now we have less than 100 lakes left in Bangalore, which is, I think, a very striking figure to see. And there is one news article I want to share that, the BBMP is saying we have no funds to develop. Clearly, the mandate of BBMP is not protecting wetlands and this thing. And they also want to develop water bodies for tourism or maybe something else. There was news that, they have like Karnataka government has converted around 2,800 acres or hectares of land, of forest land to tree parks. Now, see, you are cutting down forest to develop tree parks. This itself is like very problematic. There was a study by ISC in 2016 which says that out of 105 lakes in Bengaluru, 90% of the lakes are encroached or heavily polluted. The lakes which are there, heavily polluted. Similarly, grassland, I think Hisarghatta is the only grassland. And last time I went there, I just was very curious to see the grassland, and I was very much terrified seeing the condition there. I just shared this one photo. I think this is only some 300-400 acres of patch of grasslands which is remaining. It's the only last grassland of Bengaluru. And you can see the clear cities behind, and now the resorts are coming, and I think one film city is also proposed in this area. So this is the level of impact. Like this is the only last patch of grassland remaining, and this also we are trying to develop because it has some scenic beauty and this thing. Now talking about the this EIA. Now EIA, the regulation itself was introduced to prevent and manage such environmental impacts from happening. And EIA is done at planning stage, unless like other regulations like Air Act, Water Act, which controls the pollution, you have to emit in winds limits. But EIA is such a law, which is a very unique law, and it actually merges this principle of sustainable development with precaution principle. That means if there is any scientific uncertainty about some activity, you should not do it. That is precaution principle. Sustainable development means you have to do things in a way that it doesn't impact environment in too much thing, and it has roots from Rio Declaration, which had 3-4 very like I will just mention the principles very quickly. One was this access to information, public participation in decision-making process. One was this like precautionary approach, which I talked about, and there is scientific uncertainty. You should not you should postpone the you should not be the reason to postpone the measures to prevent environment degradation. So if you think the project is going to affect the environment, you should not do it. Okay. So in that EIA, there's provision that like it's not every project which comes for approval, you have to give the approval. So I will come to it, the process of it. And basically, after India became party to DO, like EIA notification 1994 was introduced. It is replaced by the notification 2006. And basically, in the EIA, this 2006 notification, we have two categories of project. One is category A, one is category B. Category A projects are those projects which are appraised at the central level by the Ministry of Environment, by the central government, because they are the larger projects, and they are considered to have more impact on the environment, on things around them. And category B are like projects which can be appraised and approved by the state government. And it's not that all the projects are like should be by state government. It also threshold of activity. For example, if coal-based power plant, if it's some particular capacity, it can be approved by the state level. Beyond that, will be approved by the central level. So I will just share one last slide about the EIA process, just to give a brief information about what it is about. It will help us. Yeah. So basically, there are primarily 5 steps. So I think this EIA part is missing here. I forgot to mention. So screening is only done for category B projects where the SCAC, so basically there is expert committees which go through their project proposals. So whatever project proposals comes to them, they go through them and they decide whether this project requires like EIA or not. That is for category B. So this category A, B are given in the EIA notification 2006 in the schedule. This is all listed, some eight categories and some subcategories. So building construction falls under category B. And there's also like caveat, like, only like projects which are like beyond certain capacity, like more than 20,000 square meters will be requiring environment clearance. Otherwise, smaller projects are just, but building piles are more than enough for them. So there's no law for environment clearance requirement for the smaller buildings which have. And if you're planning a township which is beyond 50 hectares, then of course again you have to go for EIA. But those will be treated as B1. B1 means they require EIA. But for the building construction between those 150,000 and 20,000 square meters, it's just a discretion of the EAC, state level EAC. Now, likewise, we have authority at the central level for Ministry of Environment Forest. Similarly, we have state environment impact assessment authority for the state level. It is also, you can say, the reflection of the Ministry of Environment at the state level. So once you decide that project requires EIA, then you do scoping. Scoping means scoping is very necessary because it there is a model TOR in terms of reference, which sets up the sets out the kind of studies the project proponent will do to do the EIA. And in the scoping, they can also prescribe some additional studies. Suppose a project is near some wetland or near some grassland, they can prescribe some additional conditions. But usually it is the copy paste thing that is happening, and sometimes the deliberation is not very detailed. Our panel list can throw more light on that. After scoping, there's EIA report. So EIA study is being done. So after the EIA study is being done, this draft EIA is put for the public consultation. So this publication, people can share their concerns about their whatever concerns about environmental concerns about the project to this, and then again this draft EIA will be updated based on the public feedback, and it will be put to the ACAC or state level appraisal committee for appraisal. They will see whether all the concerns have been met or not, and then they will recommend their suggestion, grant or rejection of the clearance to the CR for the state level. Now, this state appraisal committees can reject the project 2 level. One is at the screening and scoping level itself, which hardly we have any example. A second at the final appraisal, which also we have hardly any project being said no at this appraisal level. So this is all about this EIA. I want to summarize. I know I exceeded time, so I will just 2 more minutes to highlight some shortcomings about the EIA. So one major shortcoming is that EIA notification itself is not a law as such. It's not a parliamentary approved thing. It is a notification. So because in EP Act, even a rule to amend the rule, you have to go through parliament scrutiny, but it is a notification. It's very easy to change the or bypass the parliamentary scrutiny anytime you want to amend the EIA notifications. There have been more than 60-70 amendments till date since 2006. So it is very easy to amend this EIA notification. Reports are prepared by the consultants who are hired by the project proponent. So there is a clear conflict of interest. They will never tell the true story because then they will lose their business. And most of the cases, the EIA are mainly project specific, though there are requirement to do cumulative impact assessment. Suppose in an area, if I want to open a resort, if there are 10 more resorts, there are 1 more power plant, there's road, then I have to see the impact of the entire thing, not just my resort. But this thing is still it's very challenging to do this cumulative impact. And public consultation is at the post EIA stage. So once you do the EIA, then public consultation comes. So we have a very limited scope to intervene. Though we can intervene in the courts or all this thing, but in the process of EIA, it is very limited. And after establishment of NGT in 2010, I think this EIA scope has little bit improved because there is a huge public vigilance and number of cases going to the courts, and NGT has also shown very active. They have quashed number of environment clearances. They have even suspended clearances. They have put compensation amount for the builders, which we'll discuss later on. But in all the discussion, in all the studies we have done, we have seen the biodiversity aspect of it, the biodiversity loss. We talk about wetlands, it is loss. We talk about pollution, but this biodiversity aspect is somewhere missing. This is one I wanted to flag it out. No one is talking about the birds which used to come to the wetlands, all the wildlife which used to be around Bengaluru. So this is one thing. So with this, I think I have summarized the context. I am hopeful that I have done it well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Debudityo. I'm very happy to be co-organizing this session today because we're trying here to understand how our regulatory processes are protecting our environment. It's such an important topic because this is related to the city's climate future. I just want to start with like a few numbers. Debudityo explained many of these points, but I'm just going to summarize that in terms of one. Bangalore's urban cover increased 350% in the 25 years from 1992 to 2017. There was a study. So in these 25 years, it increased 350%, right? The urban cover, the built up area. The area under vegetation reduced from 17% of the city to less than 6%. And we now have about 2 square meters of green space per capita. The standard WHO standard is about 9 square meters, and we have very little green space, in the city now compared to earlier. Of course, here they also talked about the area of water bodies have reduced to a very small, minuscule 0.7%, and most importantly, the surface temperature, the land surface temperature, that's one parameter that can be used to understand the change over time. That has increased from 33 degrees centigrade to 41 degrees centigrade. This is the surface temperature. That's a whopping 24% increase. And these have huge implications. I mean, it's related to human activities like transportation, construction, power generation, so many things. Now, and these have it's going to impact us in terms of not just things like rainfall patterns, flooding, water scarcity, etc., but it's also going to help impact us in terms of the physical and mental health, right? And that's huge. Now we're talking about the next master plan is talking about increasing, the city is going to increase in terms of 25 million for population. So how many more years can the city continue to be livable? So I think this is something that has huge implication on our lives and the future. And in fact, the vocabulary has changed. Like internationally, people aren't referring to this as climate change. It's actually a climate crisis. So today we're going to listen to some very interesting panelists who have, background in urban planning, environment science, industry, economics, and environment regulation, as well as journalism. So let's figure out how Bangalore is faring and how the path of urban development that we have chosen and what the implications are for our climate future. So first, I'd like to open the questions with Mohan. So Mohan, from your background in architecture and urban planning, and you also did the study about, why Bangalore is flooding and what can be done about it. So over the years, how have you seen the city change? How has our environment been affected? And what is your learning from maybe the study you can talk about? You're on mute.
Thanks, Meera. And I will conveniently avoid your first question as to how the city has changed, because we will all have just sad stories to share. But to address it objectively, other than the very important statistics the two of you shared about the size and growth and things like that, I think the nature of the city has changed essentially from being a responsible, decentralized model, though it was not stated as a political statement at that time. There could be smaller areas and zones which would be nested within a particular topography, so you would have the impact limited. Now, one of the things that has happened with the large-scale development is that one development that happens in Marathalli will directly impact what happens 10 kilometers away. This could be changes in the watersheds to how the transport system is networked and so on. And I think basically, this is also a reflection of the very extremely siloed attitudes of, even if they're very capable departments or consultants who address these issues. There is no holistic vision that brings it together. We continue to treat cities as land use plan based organisms, which has been shelved across the world, I think decades ago. There is absolutely zero understanding of nature and natural systems as organic and dynamic systems, We continue to draw strict lines around lakes and drains as if they should listen to us and not us listening to them. So I think these are the very larger issues, and the NGT that you mentioned is yet another complication, not because of its intentions. The intention itself is very good, but to make it completely non-contextual, to say across the board, we will apply these buffer zones or control zones without any understanding of the functionality or the performance of open spaces. We continue to imagine open spaces as recreational for walking or taking my pet or something. But it's very important to understand the ecosystem services other than the ecological ones, the socio-cultural ones, livelihood-based interconnections that Bangalore has always had. And Bangalore is not an exception in this. Every Indian city has this. Those are being lost, and that is one of the biggest vulnerabilities for our people.
Thanks, Mohan. So before we get started with like the big picture, I just want Bhanu to come in. Bhanu, you have a background in environment science, and can you tell us how the local changes matter? So when we talk about environment, we talk about like, I don't know, the forests, Western Ghats, Himalayas, etc. But within the city, how does it matter?
Thanks for having me, Meera. So I think there's generally until maybe in the last 10 years, there's been a lot more focus when we talk about nature or biodiversity. The focus has always been on, as you said, the Western Ghats or these far off places, protected areas and things like that. But I think we're increasingly realizing that the world is rapidly urbanizing and India is rapidly urbanizing. By most estimates, more than half our country's population is going to be living in cities, which means you cannot rely on nature to be only present or valued in some far off mountain somewhere or in a remote island somewhere. You have to protect and value the environment that you're actually living in, because most of us are going to be living in a city. And the way local environment, you can see that development has very local, very tangible changes, right? We all talk about how it's become hotter. You mentioned that land surface temperatures have gone up. We know that a lot of ecosystems that we took for granted maybe 10, 20 years ago have now disappeared. There are plenty of studies to show that biodiversity has changed in the city. And there are also studies now increasingly to show that apart from, say, physical impacts of poor environmental health, like, respiratory illnesses, pollution-related diseases, there are also very tangible mental health impacts that a compromised natural environment can have. So the more you're able to breathe fresh air, the more you're able to access green spaces, more likely that you're going to have a good mentally happy life as well. So there's obviously a lot of importance to urban areas. And I think the reason we need to focus so much on urban environment now is simply because whether we like it or not, most of us are going to be living in a city, or wherever we are living is going to become a city. Yeah.
That's a good point. Wherever we are is going to become a city.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bhanu. If I can just ask Alka to connect what Bhanu was talking about, something at the local level, and how does this connect to the larger climate change, climate crisis we are all talking about, and how will it impact the city itself?
Thanks. I mean, can make many more connections between the local and the global. I would in fact make 7 connections between the local and the global. The first, as you very rightly said, is the impacts of climate change. So for example, there's a study that shows that with every degree Celsius warming, extreme rainfall events will increase by 7% for every degree of warming. And it's not that we don't have solutions to this, but even in an advanced country like Germany, just one round of floods last year cost them $50 billion. So there is a limit to engineered solutions to adaptation. The second connection I would make is that emissions are going on increasing. Especially for India, if you look at the next 30 years, the projections show that the fastest increase is going to be in the industry sector, because power sector is projected to get cleaned up with renewable energy. But steel sector emissions are projected to quadruple over the next 30 years, and cement sector emissions are projected to triple over the next 30 years. Mitigation actions are also scaling up. So for example, you would have seen all these articles about utility scale solar, the largest solar park in the world and so on. And that itself creates its own potentially inadvertent consequences at the local level. So we need to look at local solutions like rooftop solar photovoltaic, which are not achieving their full potential in our cities because of a number of regulatory reasons, and depend less on these utility scale solar in order to meet these targets that we've recently set for ourselves for 2030. The fourth is that international regulations are getting tighter. And I don't just mean, for example, the net zero 2070 target that India announced, which is going to take much more than changes in the energy sector. Everything will be affected. It means embodied carbon in the buildings that we construct. It means the cooling emissions for, if you want to combat the urban heat island effect with air conditioning, those cooling emissions, everything gets counted, and no one sector will be enough. And if 2070 seems like very distant, like way off in the future, from next year itself, India's emissions are going to get scrutinized by the international community in a report called the Biennial Transparency Report. So far, we were submitting something called a biennial update report, which was just for information, what are our emissions? But going forward, our methodology of reporting and the way we count our emissions are going to get scrutinized quite stringently. The last few changes I would suggest, that are happening at the global scale, which will have a local effect, are that industry itself in its export markets is coming up against stronger barriers, stronger prices. For example, the European Union is setting up a tax called a carbon border adjustment mechanism, saying our steel industry is subject to environmental rules. Why shouldn't imports also have to pay the same price? And Indian steel industry, which is the backbone of the, the construction that you're talking about, is very aware of this. Investors also are looking at the climate risks and the climate regulatory risks of any investment they make. And so, for example, even the central banks like RBI are stress testing or preparing to stress test their investments for climatic risks. So just within a decade, there are going to be lots of effects from all of these kinds of driving forces. And finally, I would say that India is hosting something called a Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. So globally, we are taking the lead on this, on this particular kind of activity and raising awareness about it. So locally, we need to walk the talk as well. So I would say that it's very important to connect the local and the global. Picking just check boxes will not be enough, and nature will find a way. Thanks.
Thanks, Ulka. So now that we have kind of set the context between, connecting the local with the global and the implications for our city itself, let's come to the topic, the development projects in the city, the construction sector. It's one of the biggest in terms of the size of the industry, in terms of revenue, in terms of, jobs, people employed, all of that. And I'd like to now move on to Dr. Jairam. So you have been, you're an environmental engineer. You have that. You've been working for many, many years in that space, both in academia and otherwise. And you have been part of this. You have chaired the ACA authority. What has been your experience? How has the authority actually focused on these issues, from a prevention, from a mitigation perspective? Do share that, please.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Meera Madam. So good evening to all. So actually, I'm Professor K.C. Jairam, as a member of ACAC, State Environmental Appraisal Committee, and as well as Environmental Impact Assessment Committee Chairman from 2017 to 20. I worked in BAT, Bengaluru Institute of Technology. Last year only I got a retirement. Actually, as of all of you know about our Bangalore. So Bangalore is blessed with the 3 major valleys. The developmental projects affected the Bangalore development, definitely. Actually, our Bangalore or any city in, if you are taking from Harappa Mohenjo-daro to established near the bank levels, near the banks of the river, and as well as near the sea, etc. But our Bangalore, the speciality of Bangalore was constructed, established by our Kempegoda, very good place. So it is a city of lakes. So it is a pension, people are called as pensioner paradise. So like this. So actually in EA project, the environmental impact assessment project, so we come across in 26 years worked as in the committee. So in that there are n number of projects that was coming up by so many construction projects and as well as industrial projects. So in that any establishment, if it crosses 150,000 square meters, so they have to go for EAA study, preference, etc. If it is less than 150,000 and more than 20,000 square meters, so they have to do basic study, that is environmental management plan. So they have to give. So before the project, during the project, during the construction of the project, and as well as after the construction of the details about the total environment in the surrounding area. So they have to take flora and fauna, the air quality, and as well as traffic study, and the power consumption, and the source of water, how they are going to treat the wastewater. So the recognized consultant will come to us. So they are going to deal with explain about all these things. So in that, in our period, actually, I think I know about some of the heritage building. So some HAL road, old HAL road, that army people are coming to us to construct a hospital. Taking out the heritage building was there. So we actually oppose, some of our members and including myself oppose that we have to retain that heritage building and construct adjacent to that heritage building. So like that, we advised them to do like that. And we are rejected the nice projects. The nice guy has come to our committee to do the construction projects. We outrightly rejected that, number 2. And number 3, monthly projects, know about in our Bengaluru Lake area. So that is through NGT, there are so many, this thing has taken place. So in that also, we have rejected that one. And in the, I myself suggested for the big build 500 houses or 1,000 houses in one establishment. So we are suggesting them to treat separately the sullage and as well as sewage, the grey water and as well as dark water, so that it is easy to mix up the, there is not much pollutant in that. So we can treat it to some extent and mix it with the Kaveri river or drinking water. So we can treat it to some extent and we can reuse that water for our drinking purpose. In the same, I suggested that. So our brigade group, they have implemented that particular grey and dark water implementation in one of the project in Mysore Road. So like this, so we have done so many KDB projects also. KDB people will come to us. In that there is a natural valley is there. So we told them to keep the natural valley buffer. We should retain as it is to the water flow, etc. in that particular. Britishers, all of you know, Britishers have done some survey work. For all village map will be there. So in that, so there will be a primary nala, secondary nala, and tertiary nala. Actually, we examine thoroughly in our meetings. So in that, almost MOF guidelines, NGT, and as well as Supreme Court intervening and giving some special guidelines due to some pressures of politicians or some guys in the government level. Say, for example, So earlier, any establishment, if you are going to establish a project, so from the lake, 150 meters, it should be there, meters will be there. And in the earlier, primary nala, secondary nala, and tertiary nala, earlier from that particular project, secondary 50 meters, then tertiary 25 meters. So due to pressure, our MOF reduced it to 50 meters, 25 meters, and as well as 15 meters respectively. So in this, so actually due to pressure of our even MLA, ministers, even all in India particularly, so these three, the Nyayang, Karyang, and as well as Shashakang should work together. So then only we can implement this without affecting to the environment.
Thanks.
So particularly in one word way, I can say, whatever the resources are there in on the earth, say for example, 99% of the resources are occupied by 1% of the people, are grabbing by 1% of the people. Remaining 1% of the resources, we are fighting, common people fighting for the 1% by 99% of the people. So that is the fate of our India. So for this, I actually suggested, and so instead of going for the even KD people and as well as BDA people, instead of making that Kempegowda layout or Vishweshwar layout, Karanth layout, I suggested them to go for vertical, take 10 acres itself. In that, go for vertical development. So other area, you make it a green. So it is very, very simple, very, very useful idea to conserve our nature and as well as greenery. So in this context, I some suggestion to the so many members. Actually, the source of water earlier for Bangalore city. So number one is started through lakes only. After that, government of Karnataka, the Bangalore authority giving a water from after that Tippagonanalli lake. So both are obsolete nowadays. So we have to regenerate this Esarghatta lake and as well as Tippagonanalli lake, instead of bringing Kaveri water from all the way from 80-90 kilometers from Kaveri river.
Not just that, there are new projects, sir, from Linganamaki and Etanhole and all that.
So instead of that, we have to regenerate, because we are very blessed with three major valleys: Rushmavati Valley, Ebbard Valley, and as well as KNC. We have to regenerate it. Whatever the wastewater generated, we have to treat it, and we have to running of the soil to some distance. So then regain its original strength, and we have to treat it to a final level public. So this is our thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Jairam. I'll come back to you, to learn more about the actual process and the challenges. But I just want to bring Bhanu in. And Bhanu, can you share how your experience has been? You have been looking at many of these environment impact assessment reports for many projects. What are your findings?
So yeah, the series we did at CM, we were looking at how real estate projects, how they are given environmental clearance, basically how they assess the impact of their projects on biodiversity specifically, and also what the SCI considers before they give clearance. And one of the things, as Devaditya very clearly explained how EIS work for real estate projects, and he pointed out that smaller projects between 20,000 and 150,000 square meters of built up area don't even need an impact assessment. All these projects need to fill a couple of forms and just answer a few yes or no questions. Literally, some of the responses are just one-word responses. So the SCI might say, is there any impact to fauna? And the project proponent, the builder, will say no. And that's it. So that is the level of scrutiny that some of the smaller projects have. And for the larger township projects where an impact assessment has to be done, again, there are lots of problems ranging from there are very basic factual errors. There are scientific names of plants, flora and fauna that are spelt wrong. There are animals that are, it's very unlikely that you would find in Bangalore city that are listed. Animals that you wouldn't find in Asia that are listed. So, very absurd errors that you, in this day and age, you can easily rectify by looking at Google. And then, of course, the larger thing that practically everything from the smaller Form 1A forms that the smaller projects use to the complete 200-page, 300-page environment impact assessment reports that the larger township projects do. They're rife with plagiarism. There's copy pasting and plagiarism, which it appears that with a little bit of effort, it's very easy to pick out. But when I spoke to the current SEA chairman, Dr. K.R. Sriharsha, he said they don't even have a software. They have no mechanism to pick out things like plagiarism. And these are things that have been reported several times. It's not that what we found is new. We've just found it for real estate projects in Bangalore. But these are things that have been reported for real estate, for EI projects across the country by several people, by journalists, researchers. And the MOEF has even said that things like plagiarism would be dealt with seriously, that they would revoke such clearances and things like that. But it's not clear if anything of that sort is happening. So yeah, by and large, like if I had to summarize in a single sentence, there are all these rules, and we can discuss whether the rules itself are adequate or not. But whatever rules are there, it's very clear that it's not being implemented faithfully, and there are very there is a certain question about the integrity of the functioning of the system itself. And yeah, so I think.
So Banu, you're talking about basically there is like at the simplest level, at the lowest level, it's lack of application of mind. But I'd now like to actually take on a larger issue when there is a deliberate obfuscation or misrepresentation and all that. And there are certain projects where, obviously when the scale of the project is so high or the investments are so high, and that those challenges are there. So for that, I'd like to ask Nitin Seshadri. He's here. He's from the community, the local neighborhood that was adjacent to a very, very large SEZ project, which was proposed some years ago, and how the community actually opposed the project because of the implications on the local environment, especially the wetlands of Bengaluru, and how the key part of that struggle was looking at how this environment impact assessment process has been followed or not, or has been kind of overcome to, and they found loopholes, or they have found crosscuts and so on. So Nitin, could you explain, what you folks found out?
Yeah, thanks, Meera. Glad to be in on this discussion with so many illustrious people. Not sure I make the cut in terms of my environmental creds to be here, but anyway, what we found was actually pretty shocking. To give you an example, a simple example, this was two large developers, right, who are building here. We found that the larger of the two developers who had been allotted, he'd been allotted something like about 67 acres of land by the KIDB on lease. But to satisfy the greenbelt requirements and just sheer greed, I guess, because he wanted to build more, he usurped another 3-4 acres of basically Kharab land, right? And he brought that into his land parcel. And the peculiar part was all these agencies, SEIA, SEAC, all of them rubber stamped his proposal, showing that he had like 71 acres instead of the 67 acres he'd been allotted. right? So that extra 4 acres of actually, which is actually Karab land, which was adjacent to his land parcel, was being used by him to clear the environmental clearances. The other interesting thing we found was he'd produced and he'd got a set of clearances, and then he had submitted these to the environmental authorities, including one very famous one from the BWSSP. And later we found that instead of he was planning to construct 17 buildings, or with each having 17 floors. Okay, this kind of construction, and he showed one building with 10 floors to the BWSSP, picked up an NOC. The NOC was pretty clear about what the NOC was for, and yet these famous bodies, SCAC, SCIA, just rubber stamped the approval, saying he has produced an NOC from the BWSSP. The list goes on and on. I'm just giving you two very specific instances of absolutely, fudging the numbers, shading the facts, and making absolutely inaccurate claims just to get approvals done.
Thanks, Nitin. So, Dr. Jairam, now I'd like you to come in on these challenges remain. I mean, there is pressure, like you talked about. There is, a large number of applications. Number of real estate projects is not funny. Like, I'm sure you will get like hundreds of them each month. And I believe your committee meets like twice a month or something, right? So, in terms of the the bandwidth, in terms of resources, in terms of the sheer logistics of dealing and going through all these applications and ensuring that they're following the norms, what are the challenges that you have faced? And if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Actually, in so many projects, so we come across, so we have checked thoroughly each and everything. So even though I told you in the beginning itself, due to some government level from the enterprises, so like this, they are coming to us, and before coming to us, they have taken almost all approvals from KPDCL, BWSSB, even BB, etc. They have cleared all the things. Finally, they have come to us. So even though I told that army people, nice monthly projects, etc., we have completely rejected. So I would not say 100% in the appraisal. So in that also, so our committee, this thing is deteriorating. So earlier, that is 10, 12 years back, the committee was good. So day by day, it is deteriorating. So because of pressure from the politicians.
Right. Thanks. Mohan, do you want to come in and actually talk about the way, is it the process? Is it the framework of this whole environment clearance? What really do you think is the issue?
It's the framing of the problem itself, which is largely responsible, because when you actually chop down the organism to its finest cells, and you can declare each cell as being healthy without having any understanding of the organism, I think that's a very sad way to practice medicine. And that's how we are practicing our urban planning or environmental systems. There is absolutely zero correlation to any of the larger systems. And like Bhanu rightly said, it's so easy to just put the tick in the box or produce a completely irrelevant study. I mean, every one of these reports they're mandated to show 1 year long air quality studies. And they produce these in 48 hours? I don't know how they do this time travel. So it's full of inconsistencies within the process, but rather than focus on the failures of the process, because there is lack of capacity and many other issues which one cannot address at this stage, I think the framing of what constitutes the environment. In this particular case, environment is availability of water, availability of a particular road width, and hence the traffic movement, and hence the air quality. The interconnected nature of the larger system. And I'm not even talking about it from a conservationist ecologist perspective. If I were to look at it purely as an urban practitioner, and let's say I'm completely blasé about the bees and the butterflies, even then it is extremely insensitive to the very basic ecosystem services that are expected. The first of the impacts that we see, of course, is the flooding, because we can all very easily say we are a zero discharge site, which is why every single EIA certification says you're not discharging anything, which is clearly an impossibility in an urban area. And why do we even create these frameworks? So that you actually force people to do completely foolish and illegal things, because it's clearly an impossibility. And it just makes it worse and worse. The framing to say, for example, is there a EIA required for conversion of land from agriculture to residential? No, there is no such thing. I can convert any amount. If I chop it up into pieces of 1,000 square meters or whatever, I don't need any permission. But the cumulative impact of that is enormous. And to say these are the 4 big villains because there are 4 big developers is easy enough target. Of course, they are the villains, but that does not mean that the rest of the development process, that includes citizens, that includes the planning authorities and the monitoring authorities, they need to be able to look at the larger picture before, hooking on to the easily identifiable problem, or even the idea of problem definition itself becomes very weak in this case.
Right. I think there is like this one big thing that, this whole issue of master plan and its ability to have like a vision and look at, like, for example, a carrying capacity of the land itself. But let's not go there. That's another humongous topic in itself. But let's come back to the process itself. Now, let's say if there are developers who are actually trying to incorporate sustainability into their projects. What are the implications really, and what would their challenges be? In fact, we wanted to get somebody from the development community today. With one of the CREDAI representatives was supposed to join us, but unfortunately he's not here. But maybe with your experience in dealing with different projects, what would you say?
You're absolutely right. And it's completely wrong to simply tar everyone with the same brush, to say everyone who's a practicing capitalist is evil. It really doesn't help the conversation in any way. If the intent is right, you actually, and we know there are several groups, whether they're institutions or developers, who are doing an excellent job, not because they want to get the EIA clearance or an IGBC platinum rating, but simply because they care. And we also know that the actual economic cost of doing so is negligible or nil compared to conventional development. But there are these myths created within the market to say, oh, I'm going to be eco-friendly and hence I have to charge you a 15% premium because it's more expensive. Again, a complete fallacious argument. I guess why is, if it is so simple and it is reachable and the technology and the powers for design are available, why is this not happening? Maybe it is a combination of apathy or awareness, and it also has to work both ways. It's not like the developer is doling out these things for people to grab. Why are the people who are actually signing all these petitions saying protect our environment not demanding performance from your developer, or even before you decide where you want to buy? We just want to make sure that we pay 5 lakh rupees for a car park, but we don't want to pay 200 rupees for the Paura Karmika who wants to pick up our garbage. So I think it actually spans many, many roles and many different responsibilities.
Right. Thanks, Mohan, for that. And if I could just take a step back again and ask Ulka, how can you connect the regulations and these the processes that are there which affect industry, and how should industry and you could take real estate as an example, but in general this is applicable to any industry that is like starting up in the city. What are the implications? Short term, are there negatives? Long term, They must be positives. And how do they really look at this? Or how can they look at it?
Thanks, Meera. I mean, I would think of it like this, right? Industry wants, first of all, regulatory certainty. You know, they want a kind of, and at the global scale, the direction of travel is now quite clear. What is not obvious is the links between the local and the global. So I would say that if we are able to mainstream some of these environmental and climate considerations into existing policy frameworks, that would help. And I'll give you one specific example, which is right now a small example. It's a specific program implemented by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs called CITIIS 2.0, Cities 2.0. It runs like a challenge in which cities get to compete and get a quite fairly large amount of funding to build urban infrastructure. But a precondition is various indicators of preparedness for climate change. So that is an example of mainstreaming some of these considerations into, into regulatory frameworks and backed by finance. The second thing I would say is, for industry, it seems to be a kind of trade-off, right, between jobs or growth and meeting these requirements. So there is a need for value addition and for valuation. And by value addition, I mean things, the sort that Mohan spoke about a little bit, but we do need some kind of innovative business models. But I would give the example of Indore, which actually looked at carbon credits for a range of, urban projects. And you can argue that the price of carbon is very low right now. They won't get much money from it. But a zero price means that the thing is worthless. So any price is better than a zero price. So you're putting a value on something which is to do with the environmental or external implications of, of what you're doing. The third thing I would say is really citizen data. Because, like, for example, somebody said, why don't, you need some kind of checks and balances. You need a countering force. And I think Bhanu's report, in fact, talks about how, there isn't too much of data on biodiversity and all of that. But you have citizen science initiatives like the Great Backyard Bird Count. Even sparrows are becoming there in our urban environment. So you don't need data on endangered species or whatever. But if you could have access on these kind of public access to these databases, I think some of these things put together would make a difference and would put a little bit of pressure as well on industry.
So what I hear you saying, and from what Mohan is saying, so one, there is a lack of awareness and understanding of these issues and how you could actually benefit by following norms, following environment regulation and doing the right thing, both on the developer, the builder side, as well as the consumer side, right? For example, I mean, I don't know, a couple of years ago, I saw this banner advertising a real estate project, which actually mentioned water sustainability. It promised that with treated water, and that's available for non-potable purpose, etc. I thought, wow, that's actually, if it's coming to an ad to say that, yes, we're actually doing these, then perhaps it'll become the norm. Unfortunately, I don't know, it hasn't become a trend, but I think that's probably where we're going, right? Where you actually understand that it doesn't cost more to do the right thing. Like, I think even as consumers, people are spending lakhs and crores to buy a property. To pay that extra, whatever, 40,000, 50,000 to ensure a rooftop solar is something people have this issue around. I think the ability to see the big picture, have a long-term vision is probably where things are getting stuck, and which means there's a lot of work to be done from the environment side, from governance perspective, in educating and ensuring that we are all on the same page on this, right? Mohan, you want to just add to that and how that can be done? In perhaps can there be, like Ulka talked about the Indore example, you earlier mentioned RERA. Are there things that we can do to make that happen?
Yeah, and the reason I also raised my hand is because I usually am the completely cynical one, and I forget the happy stories that our own cities produce. The same crisis that Bangalore and Karnataka went through in the late 70s and early 80s actually shook the establishment enough. And IISc and the state government worked to make what today now Bangalore is the solar capital of the world for hot water generation. Literally no other city has as much capacity. And this one single move was a very proactive one. It was not because it was being doled out freely or anything. It was actually a concerted effort. And if we can have what you mentioned rightly about rare earth, that every single developer has accepted it as a given. There are no questions asked about financial transparency, for example, or delivery schedules. I'm sure the same level of proactive engagement between the state, and we're using the term developers very loosely. It need not be limited to property and real estate developers. It's anybody who has a large scale development. Could be the metro, it could be the roads, it could be industries, it could be anybody. I think a very proactive approach, both by the state and more equally important is the ability to monitor and manage the process, can turn the whole situation around quite easily.
Thanks, Mohan. Before we move on to the question, I just wanted to add, one last question. There are also newer changes coming from a policy perspective, from a regulatory perspective. There is this proposed draft EA notification. There are also some recent orders and office orders and so on, which are, what kind of shift in policy do they signify? Are they trying to dilute the norms? I'd like Devaditya and Ulka to talk about these and what these implications are for our city.
So, this this draft EIA 2020 was this protest against this draft was quite famous. But what I will say is that most of these amendments have already been done, through series of OAMs, and some of these OAMs, some of the amendments were in those cases no public consultation was ever conducted. Usually when you introduce any changes to the law, you have this 60 days time when you invite comments from people about this thing. Coming to this draft, what is the 20 suggest? It goes beyond certain amendments. It also has provision of granting post facto EIA. Some projects has already finished they are completed and they haven't taken EC, so they can apply and they can take a fresh EC. That was a very problematic provision, going ultra virus to the purpose of the EIA is to prevent such damages. And if you can allow taking those things, then also this draft has exempted many, I think 40 types of projects from EC requirement. It is only proposed, but this solar power plants, maintenance dredging, photovoltaic plants, now these are even in case of linear projects. So solar power plants may sound very good, but again, when you have it also have impact. If you establish a big solar power plants over thousands of acres, then it has its own land impact. And it dilute this scoping process. Scoping is very necessary, where you prescribe this project specific terms of reference for EIA. But in this draft EIA, they allowed for, I think, 3 years old baseline data to be used for an EIA. There were exemptions granted for what they call security and strategic consideration. And what is strategic, they didn't define. Now, if someone today, tomorrow, government says that I want to set up a nuclear power plant in near Bengaluru, and it's strategic because of the power requirement, then you cannot do anything with those kind of ambiguities in the law. Then there are many more dilutions to it. Okay, so
the recent one, I think, that allows forests to be converted for some residential purpose, something.
No, that was for Forest Conservation Act. So now
okay.
This what I was telling about is draft 2020, which is not yet law, but EIA is also seen as a link with this Forest Conservation Act and other clearances. So basically, if you take an environment clearance, it's not that you have taken all the clearances. So you have, if there is a forest, you have to take forest clearance as well. If it is wildlife, you have to take National Board of Wildlife clearance as well. But there has been an attempt to separate all these projects. Suppose, for example, I just give one example, that suppose your project is a coal-based power plant. Now you will have a transmission line, you will have a road, you will have railway line to bring the coal to you, you will have a pipelines to bring water to your power plant. Now, suppose one of the component, transmission line, includes forest. Then the project requires forest clearance. But what they do is they will take first the clearance of only the power plant site. And then they create a fait accompli. We'll say that now power plant has come, now we need only just 4 hectares of forest, a 4 hectares nothing. But if you see the impact, it is cutting through a forest, then it will fragment the forest. It may have impact on wildlife and all these things. So this kind of impacts, like, this is like what we call cumulative impact, which is like, seeing the overall picture. It is somewhere missing, and there has always been like efforts from people like, as Bhanu and the people said, concealment is very much common. And EACs, these expert committees, they don't have sufficient capacity to verify each of everything. Like, for example, I just take one more example. Like, we try to see what this expert committees do with the public consultations, because this entire public hearing is video documented. So first ministry, like environment, they didn't give the information. They said voluminous, all this. They filed the first appeal, they disposed it. Then they filed second appeal, the CIC. It came for hearing after 1 year. And in the CIC hearing, the MOF person said, we don't have the public hearing minutes, the videos, and they are available state this pollution control board. Now that means all these clearances, they have not even seen the public hearing videos, how public has brought the questions they have raised. So all this kind of, deliberation, like, critical deliberation, this doesn't happen at the expert meeting. Yeah. Thanks.
Right. I invite people in the audience, folks, if you could just add your questions, or share your thoughts on the chat box, we can take those up. Before that, I mean, I'd like to ask, like, some of the panelists, I don't know, Debodityo or Mohan, if you can talk about where do we get the citizens involved? Let's say if the people, lay folks who are actually interested in seeing a better process, a better way of making this happen to ensure that projects actually follow norms and we have a better environment. Where do citizens start? As in, what are the touch points in terms of, of course, fundamentally, we need to get this into, let's say, an election agenda, but in some ways, regulatory stuff is a little complex. Not everybody gets that these are things that affect us like in such a huge way. So how do we communicate this? How do we connect this to what people face every day? And how do we get to build that demand for this change?
I think the first is, of course, the access to information. If I am able to understand what is my ward level development plan or the immediate neighborhood, do I have to run behind 50 different departments to understand it? Or if there is simply open access to proposed projects, I don't need to know the commercial details. I don't need to know exactly how many square feet is being sold at what price, but merely to say the 17 acres of land, which used to be a Gomala or a commons till some time, has now been given over to a development. How do I even become aware of it till I actually see the construction machinery land on that site? I think the access to information is the most critical. Are there portals? Are there ways in which, for example, we announce every single, let's say, public project that is being inaugurated, every single tap that is being put somewhere, we see 500 advertisements coming out. But is there a portal that is available, public or private, that tells us what kind of development is happening at what space, just at the very local level? Just that awareness, I think, can change a lot of things starting from the neighborhood to the city level.
That's true. I think lack of data information is a big problem, not just from a BBMP perspective, but even within SEA. I think we've had challenges accessing some of the reports. Documents disappear and they're not complete. It's not clear about the authorship or dates. I think there are many issues in terms of transparency in terms of data, and also about it's, I think, very hard to make the connection between a project and the jurisdiction, the authority which is in charge, to what's actually happening on the ground. For example, and somebody pointed this out about smart city projects, right? If I can just read that out. Sunita has pointed out Smart City is doing a project in Balbhavan and Kabban Park called Protection and Redevelopment. We find the entire natural landscape of Balbhavan has changed with hundreds of palm trees, Mexican grass, and this is obviously going to affect the biodiversity and the birds and so on, and also the lack of hydrology studies. How do we even find out what's happening? How do we intervene? Smart City is a separate, then they have this whole mission mode, right? It doesn't come under BBMP. How do you get that accountability in
Yeah, I think whether it is a state or a parastatal, it doesn't matter. It's still public funds at every single level. So the very basic principle of accountability means that I need to know where my tax rupee is being spent. That's the whole idea behind right to information at so many different levels. And I don't think there can be any organization of any nature, and like David mentioned, I don't think these are issues of national security for me to know whether smart city wants to put a skating rink or not. And it should be just available even before any work can happen. This is not, this is beyond public consultation. This is merely dispensing of my responsibilities as a citizen, exactly like how a taxpayer declares everything. They know everything about how I earn and spend my money. Why should I not know where they spend my money?
Right, but I think Sunita's point is very, valid. Like, what should be the clearances? What should be the process for projects which are initiated by the government? So we've been talking about developers, we've been talking about industry. Dr. Jairam, do you want to come in and explain how, if it's a BBMP project, a BDA project, I think they go through a similar process, right? You talked about BDA going through, the clearances for the Kempegoda layout and all that. What about the smart city projects? Is it similar?
Madam, that smart city project and other project, one very interesting request to our Citizen Matters forum. The people should questioning the government, questioning our participation, should ask each and every office. So first of all, actually, the basic thing is population pollution is taking place in India or in the world, number one. Number two is politics. You should avoid basically these two. Population pollution rather than water pollution, air pollution, etc., etc. We are talking about the population pollution and as well as political pollution. So we have to, how we are going to removing these two? So in this, the basic thing in my mind, since Modi has come to power, so we are sending so many questions to the Modi government, Modi itself, the election reformation. I told you, no, madam, actually that resource on the earth, 99%. Once again, I am telling 99% of the resources are grabbed by 1% people, that politicians, industrialists, etc. Remaining 1%, we are 1% of the people. So for that, you people, our next webinar should be a election reformation. That means election should conduct by a what itself, without what going to house or this thing. Our session has done something, no. So like that. So there is no canvas at all. So like this, our citizen matters. We are requesting you people to come forward. I am also with you to go to any level. So you should conduct these type of awareness to the people and sending to the government, to the Karnataka government and as well as central government. One election without canvas, the election commission should take the responsibility. Say, for example, our Basavanagudi, n number of candidates, say 20 candidates should stand for election or MP election, Bangalore South, say for example. So we'll identify 3 or 4 locations for general this thing. The election commission should take the responsibility to send all the things from their, what is their aim and responsibilities after winning. So like that. So they have to do. So without this, if you are going to conduct this type of webinars, n numbers, there is no use at all. So for citizen matters, I think Mohan Esrao and other participate these things.
True.
So citizen matters, take this very seriously. I am with you people. I will come to any level. Because everywhere, if if you're going to get one certificate, they will ask so much of rupees, even everywhere. So for that, so suppose a MLA or MP without expenditure, if he wins, so you won't come for what? Taking the money or bribe. So
I think
that should happen in India first. This is from my side. So I expect Citizen Matter should take this webinar in the next future course of time. Thank you.
absolutely. Thanks, Dr. Jaram. I think you really hit the nail on the head. You're talking about the root cause. But again, coming back to maybe yeah, totally, I agree. But if I could just ask Debuditya to just bring in, like, if there are citizen groups which actually want to do the right things. Nitin talked about his experience. Debuditya, what would be the legal remedies that you would advise?
See, Mira, thank you for asking the question. So I was waiting for my turn to address it. So, there are enough legal remedies, and this EP Act, Environmental Protection Act, is so powerful act. It enables, like, central government to take action, though they don't take it. But we can use those laws in our favor, like, because one thing is that you can challenge the environmental clearances in the NGT. And there are many examples where, like, this, it also depends on a judge, like, kind of judges sitting there. But I think at one point in time, NGT was quite active in hearing environmental clearance cases. So its citizen group can, first of all, they should send representation to the authorities responsible for anything environment. You can send to the your Minister of Environment, regional office, or your state pollution control board, or the secretary, whoever it is. You send representation, it will go to some places. Second thing, like, after this, there is a judgment of CIC where this says that all the environmental information should be public document. Shivani Ghosh order in 2010 or 11 sometime. Since then, all the EI documents have to mandatorily uploaded online. And there's judgment which says that the time period to challenge the clearance, so 60 days, should start from a date of communication. It's not like the information was available online. Then you can always cite those cases and say that, I am communicated on this date, and my deadlines to start, like, challenging this case is from the date of communication. And you can file RTI also. RTI is so important tool to do this thing. And the last thing I will say that, all these cases where there's no law, Supreme Court has really played a very important role. In many cases, in case of Kaziranga, and in any, like you see, laws have been, like, Supreme Court has played such an important role. So do think of sending at least one letter to the Supreme Court. Okay, so I know many places that people have written to the court and they're taken as a suo motu petition, or like those things. Because I think in our country, judiciary is still active, and they keep us hopeful. And we have enough example, like in case of Bengaluru only, like this Bengaluru and links. I think Nitin can talk more about it. NGT intervened, and somehow the project didn't stop, but they put some compensation amount. Say it had determined for the future incidences of this kind of things.
Right.
So always, you should send written complaints, and they work very well because they're answerable. Also ask questions after 1 month. What happened to my complaint?
Yeah, fair enough. But that kind of puts the onus on citizens, because it's just really a lot of work. And I know Nitin's group's experience has been like, it's been taking years to actually fight something that to make a difference. And in fact, if Nitin could respond to this point, for example, Biju has talked about, Biju Cherath has said there's no clear process followed in scoping the work in a heritage park, and this is Kaban Park we're talking about. How do you get the information, Nitin, from your experience of really hammering away and getting the information? What would you advise Biju? He's talked about, like, they've got the department to do a hydrology report, but to get it used in the plan. So how do you keep nudging this and keep pushing without kind of losing steam?
There's only one way, Meera. There's no shortcut in this process. I think you just have to keep pushing it through letters, through RTIs, through meetings. If it is not done, you say what has been done about it, file an RTI, force them to respond. There's just no easy way out from this. It's just banging your head on a brick wall sometimes. But if you bang your head sufficiently, as long as you don't end up breaking your head at the end of the day, you may make a dent in the brick wall. That's the only sort of hope and optimism with which we do things. And it's taken a lot of effort. I would say it's taken thousands of hours of effort, of man-hours of effort on the whole, to have this entire thing done. I wanted to also briefly respond to what Dr. Jairam was talking about governments and the process. we've been on that side too. I mean, we've seen that 10 years ago, Meera, when I had a lot more black hair than I do right now, we had this famous underpasses project on Sajapur Road, which we led an agitation against, and we ended up getting that project scrapped. And we saw those environmental clearances from there. The problem is there also, there's a cozy nexus that's formed, a nexus between the contractor who's executing the project and the government, right? So in a sense, the contractor does all the shady things required to push the EIA quickly through the various committees, and that's exactly what ends up happening.
Yeah, and I think it's number of such instances are so many that you need a lot more people getting involved, because you need to keep hammering away, little pockets around the city. This is, otherwise I think as individuals, people are just going to lose steam and give up. So given the time, I mean, I think we need to come to the last question, which is a very interesting point from Jenny. And this I'd like Mohan to address. Like, do you think the city by definition is not sustainable? I mean, all of this we are trying, of course, city is great, it's vibrant, it brings people together, it creates spaces for innovation. All of that is true. But from an environmental perspective, can a city be sustainable at all? Is it, if it's going to be designed with just humans in mind, how do you bring the other aspects into our own planning process?
Short answer is no. A city by definition cannot be sustainable. It is only sustainable because we draw up the question paper and do the answers and mark ourselves to say, these are the points I will get for doing ABC, and hence I'm sustainable. And the whole idea of even conversations that we have about making way for nature in the city is such a sad stand to take, because without nature, there would be no city in the first place, because we don't exist as these capsules in space. It is not just nature, I don't mean just pristine ecosystems, but the larger hinterland whose health is absolutely vital for every city is what sustains every city. So in a truly ecological sense, no city can be sustainable using the conventional understanding of sustainability. However, one can hope to do the minimal damage, or at least the known damages that are possible, and reduce the ecological footprint to levels which will not be destructive, let's say, as an intergenerational equity. That's the best one can hope for. To say we will be a zero carbon, completely neutral existence on the planet is, I mean, we have crossed the threshold at least 2 or 3 decades ago.
Right. And I think it's important to also understand it's not just about us people in the city getting affected by these changes, but it's also this has implication on people living outside in the peripheral areas, in the larger rural areas as well. So we really have, I think, the footprint and the decisions that we're taking are like really huge, and this is such a big problem that I don't know, do we even know where to start? So as we come to the end, I'd like to just ask if all the panelists could have like one line that you think to talk about one thing that needs to be done immediately, because this is too big an issue to say, to find solutions. But one thing that you think, like whether from a citizen side or from a government side or from environmental side, what would you advocate right now? Mohan, you want to start, and I can go to others.
I mean, if there is one thing that I could actually do for this city, actually any city, but I will limit it to Bangalore, is to instill a deep process of decentralization, not just political and administrative decentralization, but of resource management, of space, of networks and systems. That is the most important, in my opinion.
Thanks, Mohan. Banu, you want to come in next, wear your environmentalist hat and tell us what
I'm going to wear my journalist hat.
Okay.
And my suggestion is actually somewhat easier. I think one of the most important things is we need to pressure the SEIA and the MOEF to start putting up a lot of the documents that they are supposed to make publicly available. You alluded to that and how we had problems accessing some of these documents. The government, the state and union government is supposed to provide minutes of every meeting where they clear a project. And those are not up for for several years. Although the process of digitization has been happening for years. So this is very basic information that can immediately tell you if you are looking for how did this apartment get cleared, and you go to the minutes of the meeting, it will immediately tell you how much scrutiny was there, what questions were asked. And so those documents to do with any kind of clearance, I think that's the first thing that they need to be pressured by the media, by citizens to put up, because that's the basic level of information you can have. Yeah.
Thanks. Absolutely. I think there is interest even from neighborhood RWAs who want to know what is the project coming next door and what would be the implication in their own neighborhood. So it's pretty important. Thanks, Bhanu. Ulka, do you want to come in next?
Sure. I mean, this is something that is actually already underway, which is for the city to make a climate action plan, but not to do it in an ad hoc opportunistic way, but to actually use scientific methods to do scenario modeling. And the numbers will become very clear. What are the planetary limits against that, that we're up against? I actually disagree with Mohan that we had crossed that threshold 2 or 3 decades ago. I think we have another 3 decades actually, but the scale at which things are happening, we need to make these plans which are not just looking at the next year, but at the next 3 decades.
Thanks, Ulka. And Dr. Jairam, your last word. Anything else other than, of course, you really refer to the most deepest problem, but anything else you want to add, like something tangible immediately that some of us could do?
The implementation part, madam, very crystal clear implementation part from the government side and as well as from the people side should be crystal clear. The rules and regulations, so they have to put forward and accepted by the people. That's all. To tell you regarding our existing area, the good old area, people are constructing above 800 square meters. So they are not given the power so far because they are helping to the big people. Say, for example, Mantri, Shobha, like that. If, for example, 4060 or 5080, people are constructing above 800 square meters. So that will certificate. So BBMP is not giving. So many buildings are coming up like anything. Because of it is our government, no, they will give like that. So almost 4 years are over. Still some almost 5,000 buildings without the power, they are running the building so far. What of that, madam?
Right. Thanks, Dr. Jairam. I think that's a very important point. And the role of government, of course, is the biggest in this conversation. Thanks, everybody. It's been a very, very interesting conversation. A lot of important points have come out. And I'm going to hand it over to Sneha to kind of conclude. Over to you, Sneha.
I just wanted to extend my gratitude for such an illuminating conversation on such a critically important topic. It was very interesting to listen to these perspectives, and I wanted to particularly thank our panelists, Dr. Jairam, Mr. Mohan, Ms. Ulka, and Ms. Bhanu, and of course my colleague Debadityo for taking your time and for speaking to us about this. And I also wanted to thank Meera for such an excellent, for being such an excellent moderator, as well as Sandhya for putting together this panel and making sure that everything went without a hitch. And thank you so much to BIC for giving us a platform to have this conversation, and to everybody who joined us on a Friday evening to listen to this discussion. So I just wanted to, thank you on behalf of Vidhi Karnataka.